Heidi ho, it's Kim Napick talking about the NAR changes headed for our way August 1st. So we're going to talk about North Carolina now. I've got this handy dandy form that is also being emailed as attachments. It's a lot of pages, so please don't feel completely and utterly overwhelmed because it's a lot. North Carolina just basically goes that as of August 1st, you have to have new buyer agency agreements. So even if you have one in place, you will need to have a new one in place for your buyers by August 1st. As of August 1st, all the compensation is going to drop off of Canopy. So be prepared if you're a listing agent to get calls. I'm going to try to mitigate some of that on our website, reflecting your listings, you as the agent, your information, what compensation your your seller is willing to offer. Also, in North Carolina, there is a Form 715, so you could amend your existing buyer's agency, but I would just probably recommend just doing a new one and just explaining to your people that the NAR lawsuit is requiring you to do so. So be prepared for that. I know it's extra paperwork, but the unfortunate thing is these are the times we're living in. If you did not read or get your Realtor magazine, I've also included these. These are must-know changes to the forms for 2024. It is related to North Carolina, and it does go over the 2T, the 4T, estate property flow chart, which I think is kind of nice for some of us that don't deal with estates on a regular basis, which is a new form. There is a new disclosure form for vacant land, which I like very much. That's Form 142. There is a new Form 170 in North Carolina, guidelines for seller. I like this very much. Also, because it includes verbiage like leave the power on and the utilities on until the day of close, along with some other things. There's also a redraft to compensation, which is Form 220. There are major edits to Form 800T, new construction. I don't think too many of us are using that form. Typically, builders have their own new construction contracts. But if you do utilize the new construction contract in North Carolina, I do highly recommend that you take some time and you read it because lots of changes have happened. When we get over to Form 2T, and I'm just kind of going through the pages that have had changes versus every single page because it would take entirely too long. This basically says, this talks about your effective date for due diligence. And this also allows the seller to say, hey, I want the due diligence money paid to Joe Blow, to whoever. It does not have to any longer go to specifically the seller. The other thing that it allows is for you to put a specific date or to put a number of days. So I know that's where some of us run into problems. It takes a seller 3 days to sign, and now you've lost 3 days. So now you could basically say, I want 21 days from the date of execution. So I like that change a lot for North Carolina. This is basically telling buyers, we highly recommend that you do your due diligence because we had so many people during COVID that just waived that and, are paying the consequences. They have also added some verbiage to flood and wetlands. So this seems to be coming up more and more because they're putting houses closer and closer together. Make sure you're utilizing the tools that are out there as far as protecting your buyers from wetlands and knowing what they're buying. Let's see here. The other is in North Carolina talking about HOAs and getting the information as quickly as possible to the closing attorney, and that the seller is responsible for paying to get the information to show that they are up to date. Access to the property was also updated on that page, talking about that the seller has to offer, or has to allow the buyer access to do their investigations. I know some people have talked about sellers being difficult, saying, oh, no, I'm not going to approve that appointment. They have to approve it. They're signing a contract saying that they have to. This also talks about if the buyer discovers that the seller has a violation. It talks about for the HOA or whatever, or taxes. It just basically talks about the fact that the seller has to get it resolved at their cost. Let's see here. We are over to, looks like buyer agency, Form 101. And this is talking about compensation and additional compensation. And so basically, again, read through these carefully about whatever number you put down. You cannot accept more without amending your buyer agency. So while you can accept less, so we'll just say you put 2.5% down and your buyer can only pay you 2%. I'd still say amend it, just so that everybody has it in writing. But technically, as long as it's that or below, you wouldn't have to amend it. But I'm going to tell you, for your records, always better to have your person sign off on any kind of changes whatsoever, and especially to this compensation, because I really feel like we're going to see a lot of audits, coming. A complaint's going to happen, and there's going to be an audit. So we just have to do the best we can do to make sure that everybody is checked off. This one talks about earnest money and due diligence. I don't want a trust account, so I'm not holding any of these monies. So if due diligence all of a sudden is going to be held in trust, it's got to go to your closing attorney, because I don't want to deal with it. And most firms are not dealing with trust accounts. There's very few that, that want to. And again, this is talking about that due diligence fee does not have to be paid directly to the seller. They can determine that they want it to go someplace else. And then there's additional information on the bottom about that flood hazard information. This I thought was kind of interesting. There's now a box saying that the seller is working with a relocation company. So if you're dealing with a relocation, make sure you're checking the box. Now we are, let's see here, we are at Form 201. Did I give us the wrong name here? So now we're at 201, Exclusive Buyer Agency Agreement. The buyer agency is actually even talking about we're not working with a relocation company. It's talking about the compensation. And you'll see the highlighted part, portions on there. And it says either a specific dollar amount or a percentage. Don't say that you're working for free. And of course, it's the same kind of deal in South Carolina. Again, talking about does not exceed the amount that's on the form. Talking about that you understand that your services are not free, that they actually have to initial it, that you're not working for free, that a portion of the purchase price, if a listing firm is to pay the firm all or a portion of the fee of the purchase price, it's paid to the firm, who is in turn will pay the firm cooperating. So it's just basically talking about how that's broken down so that everyone from the seller to the buyer understands how you're getting compensated. And again, it's also talking about that Form 770 and Form 220. So if you're amending something, Form 770, and I'm going to tell you, for every single file, you must have the compensation form attached so that I can match it up to what it sold for, what your check is, and what your buyer agency says. Now we're at non-exclusive buyer agency. This is going to be, I'm going to call this sort of like the dating. We're going out on a couple of dates, kind of buyer agency. You've got a buyer who's afraid to really sign this. And truth of the matter is there's a lot of language in there that I can see scaring off buyers. This basically kind of talks about, compensation and everything. Also states that they're not working with an agent as well. But we all know that, buyers do lie. And these forms can be completed for, I'm showing you one house, somebody's calling you about your listing. It can be for an hour, it can be for a day. You and the buyer can make the determination. And then maybe you can get them slid over to a more permanent, then they can date whoever they want to. So that's just something to think about. If you've got somebody who doesn't want to sign and commit to you long term, put the non-exclusive in front of them and see if you can't get them to move along, because they're telling us do not show properties without a buyer agency intact. So like I say, just make sure that you kind of keep that out there. The termination I thought was kind of interesting for North Carolina, because now it almost reads like South Carolina, talking about why somebody's terminating. So anyway, no real changes. I guess I just have never really looked at this form and how much it really replicated South Carolina. And it's basically saying that they're agreeing to the release of the money. So that's where I'm thinking North Carolina might end up leaning like South Carolina. Like this is just the beginning of, there'll be no automatic release. So we'll just keep further watching this, that this could become an issue in North Carolina too, where it could be parties fighting over earnest money. Last but not least is termination of agency. I think that if you have a buyer that doesn't want to work with you anymore, another agent is going to be really wary about taking them on without this form. So I would just say, if somebody says to you, well, I've been working with Kim and yeah, I signed paperwork, then if you want to fill it out and say, hey, you need to get your prior agent to sign this before I can work with you, I'm just recommending that you do, because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of cat fighting coming. And then we also have another form here. This is the form 770 for North Carolina, talking about the compensation. So if something changes between your buyer agency and the compensation being offered, here, this is your friend. Fill this form out so that you can get paid what you want. It's a lot going on. It's a lot of paperwork. I don't think the changes are over. I think as we kind of tread through all of this stuff, there's going to be more and more changes. We just have to be prepared for it. If you have questions, concerns, problems, call me. It seems like everybody all of a sudden is more and more difficult, whether it's a buyer or it's a seller. I'm seeing a lot of people pushing back, butting heads. I see a lot of agents that aren't being very communicative, and that makes our job even harder. So we're here to work together. Think of your competitor really as a coworker, and we're both here to get both sides with the least amount of effort to the closing table. But we just have to deal with what we have to deal with. So looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, and we'll go over it a little bit tighter. But if you have any questions, call me.